Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Pompey Politics Podcast. Well, tonight's show is a tapas of different topics. We are covering the national, the international, and the local, as you would expect from Portsmouth's finest political podcast. Possibly Hampshire's, I think, because I'm not sure there's another one in Hampshire. But anyway, and we've got a guest tonight. So Simon, welcome, and who have we got?
So we are indeed rejoined by, thankfully, a frequent guest on the show, Councillor George Badgwick of Paulsgrove fame. Good evening, George.
Good evening, gentlemen. How are we?
Fine, thank you very much.
Good.
I didn't quite get blown away when I went for a walk earlier on, but nearly. But it's not too bad. So to those not familiar, George is one of three Portsmouth Independence Party councillors in the ward of Paulsgrove, and he's up for re-election in May this year. And he's also a small business owner. He owns a restaurant in Drayton.
As you can probably tell, because I'm wearing a chef's uniform as we speak in the cellar of the restaurant. So I've got some brandy on hand just in case I need it.
Oh, okay. Marvelous. And for any of our listeners who have not tried Valletta in Drayton, I can heartily recommend it. And in terms of a Sunday lunch, I think probably the finest roast potatoes served outside of my own house. So yeah, if you haven't been before, get yourself down there.
I didn't think you were going to get that caveat in at the end there, and I thought you were going to be in serious trouble.
No. Man knows when he's well looked after.
Okay, right. Okay, so that my sister doesn't have to beat Ian up. We'll crack on with our questions. So thanks, George. So George, the in the controversy this week, it felt like the real story kind of got lost. Can you tell us what happened and how is the business owner concerned?
Yeah, so for those people, I guess, that are not watching, that are watching, that don't know what happened, I made a comment on a random Facebook group, and all hell broke loose when the news decided to release said statement as a front page news article. And obviously the story really should have been about the fact that there's a group of youths that are going around and not just terrorizing this business, but terrorizing a number of business and a number of people over the city in all different wards, and stealing things and threatening people and holding people up at knife point. And it's the same people. And the video obviously surfaced at the last weekend, of the CCTV footage of these youths just walking into the shop and grabbing, as many vapes as they wanted, I think £500 worth, and just brazenly walking out with it without a care in the world. And the thing that I said ended up being the main point, the main article, the main narrative, and it shouldn't have been. It should have been a story of how shopkeepers and small independent businesses are not being supported by the local police service in a sense of that. There's no punishment for crime, thus youths feeling like they could get away with anything, really. And that should have been the story, but it ended up being highlighted around myself, which was at first very anxiety triggering, because I was like, oh, here we go. But it ended up luckily working in my favor, and obviously a lot of people agreed with it. And I haven't actually spoke to the business owner since the day after the article come out, because they didn't want to be named personally or anything else like that. So I'm not entirely sure what the thing is saying, because they don't want to be named personally. It's probably not right for me to do so,
No, fair enough.
Yep. So in terms of what was it you said that got you on the front page of the news, and was that kind of just a reflex action, or was it a genuine feeling as a small business owner, looking on from the sidelines?
Yeah, well, obviously, as you know, I called them little scroats and said that anyone that brazenly goes in and steals like that off of a person should expect a beating, which I guess was quite triggering to some people. And I think it's not becoming of a councillor. It's not becoming of an elected official. You know, a lot of councillors, you know, have got to worry about literally everything they say. And I think, you know, if I was probably in one of the national parties, I probably would have got suspended for such a comment. But I don't think it was out of frustration, to be honest with you. I mean, natural frustration, like I think a lot of the population feel, in a sense of that people are just committing crimes nowadays so brazenly, and the frustration we all share with that. But I think it's got genuine sentiment in the fact of, you know, if somebody come into my restaurant and started to walk behind the bar and steal my drinks, you can be damn sure I'd be protecting it. There'd be no way I'd be sitting there and calling the police and hoping that you know, and that's not me pretending to be hard or that's just me protecting my business. You know, I could end up getting, yeah, I could end up going bad for me and taking a beating, you know, but I would do my damn best to try to protect my assets. And so I don't think it was frustration. I think it's a genuine thing. I think we should be able to essentially protect our businesses and our income. And I use the analogy in the comments of one of the sections where I was being criticized by somebody and saying, you know, if you're sitting at home one night and someone just opens your front door, breaks in your front door, walks into your family living room where you're all sitting watching TV and so brazenly goes, I'm just going to take this TV and walk out with it, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would stop them walking out with that TV. So it's the same thing. It's just happened to a business.
Mm.
Do you think people have a different impression of shop theft versus household theft? Do you think that's...
I mean, potential. I mean, and I think depending on the company, there is a difference. I mean, I guess morally, there's no difference between stealing from a big conglomerate to there is a small business, you know, from a moral perspective. But from a realistic perspective, you know, a small business is dramatically affected more than a big commercial. A big commercial will have it included within their costings and within their percentage profits. They'll have some form of allowance for this kind of behavior. They'll have insurances, things like that. But small businesses, you know, that £500 that was stolen from that vape shop, that will be a lot. But he will have to sell a lot to make up £500 of profit, like a lot. And, you know, this person's a Swissoner, a small number of staff, you know, and they now have rent to pay, bills to pay. So I think it affects them more. And people forget that, you know, behind every business is a human that's got kids, parents, aunties, uncles, brothers. They've got debts, they've got, you know, obligations, mortgages, they've got credit cards to pay off. They're humans too. So stealing from a small business is in my opinion, just like going into someone's house and stealing their TV off the wall. It's just as serious.
And I guess if we look at that, you know, a recent, you know, that in Cosham High Street, Boots closed after being in a position where effectively they couldn't display any of their medium to high value stock because, you know, people were just walking in and helping themselves. And I guess whilst we look at Boots as a major conglomerate and, you know, a very big player, I guess for all of those people who relied on that shop to, you know, provide them a relatively low paid wage, but it paid them a living, I guess, you know, that's the bigger picture that we don't see.
Completely. There's humans behind this, you know, and once again, it's, I'm not, here's on the flip side, I'm not about to condone stealing, but if it was, for example, bread and milk or a bottle of water they were stealing, that's different. They could be trying to feed their kids, not have people just walking in stealing 500 quid of vapes, you know, or something that's not a necessity to survive. I think it's a whole different dynamic. And that's where the problem comes, I think, you know. And as I say, these particular news are very well known in Portsmouth to a hell of a lot of people. And I think that's why also the article went so viral, because a lot of people had people that knew them or were victims of the same people. And I think that's what was pertinent about the article as well.
So I guess that kind of leads us nicely on to, as you said, the news made it a front page story. Do you think that they expected a different response to the one that you've seen on social media? 100%.
News love nothing more than to dig at councillors wherever they can and create negative press stories. And, you know, and who can blame them? I think when it broke, which was last Sunday, I think the article broke, because I think it was this time last Sunday, and I was up in the then one of our members of staff in the kitchen, a young lad, said, "Yeah, why do they post these articles, negative articles about you?" And I said to him, I said, "Well, you got to realise that, as part of everything I was saying, which a lot of people didn't see, was the fact I was saying, and the reason we got to do this because of underfunding with the police and blah, 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 blah." And I went into a whole narrative of why. And as I explained to him, I said, can you imagine the article that says local councillor supports reinforced police patrol? It's a boring article, whereas having a local councillor says little scroats deserve a beating is going to make people click. So I think, they try and highlight the negative or the emotive aspect of it. And I think they were expecting, as you say, an alternative response. I think they thought I was going to get hammered. And to be fair, I thought it was going to be very 50. But I know both of you guys followed it, and especially Ian, I know you followed it. And I think we saw 3 negative comments across every single share, and the article got something like 1 point something million clicks or views or whatever it was in the period. So there was only three negative responses. So I definitely got away lightly on this one, because I sometimes do open my mouth without thinking.
Or open the keyboard on your phone without pausing, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I guess is because the frustration that people feel about the invulnerability that some of these thieves seem to have, is that kind of what's coming? Because it's not like kind of people don't, their natural instinct or their first response isn't kind of like to lurch for mob rule or basically trying to be the heavy person in the shop, because that's not the responsibility of the staff either. That's to put themselves at risk. But are they doing that out of just desperation because they don't see something else happening?
I think fundamentally, yes, of course. I mean, so in my restaurant in Knoll Village, I used to have a restaurant in Knoll Village, as you will know, and we were vandalised. We had the windows smashed or something stolen 5 times in a row, and not a single police officer attended, not one. For every single time, we found blood, we found all sorts of bits and pieces. They left something behind. And we had to basically go and do our own research and put a reward out and track them all down and use the camera footage. And we had to do all the work, basically. And then once we had done all the work, we had found the people and, and we had confronted the parents and everything else like that. At that point, the police were like, "Oh, we can get involved now." And we had to be kind of our own investigators to figure out the own crime. It was ridiculous. And I think even I was getting to a point where I felt becoming a bit vigilante-ish, because what other result was there? They smashed my window 3 times, they graffitied my windows, they've come in and smashed by the bottles and taken the bottles out, and no one's listening, no one's doing anything, no one's stopping it happening. What other course of action do I possibly have? And I think that's how a lot of people are feeling nowadays. I mean, look at Hilsey. Hilsey went through a rife amount of crime last year, mainly from youths, and you had private citizens, basically starting up a local security group. There was a local guy that you probably know that owns a CCTV company who got body cams and who got high vises and gave them to local volunteers and people had to start patrolling the streets and but that's what it's kind of come to. Is it right? Absolutely not. But is it necessary? Yeah, right now it is.
So if we look at it, George, this should we say aggressive shoplifting, with absolutely no regard for fear of being caught or being prosecuted. Do you see that as a failing of the police, the judiciary, or something else?
Well, I think first of all, the case with the vapes is an ongoing investigation. So obviously we've always got to be a little bit careful about what we say and so on and so forth. I have been made aware that the individuals that were responsible have been spoken to by the police. I don't know much more, but I know that they've been spoken to by police, and it's currently an investigation. So I think we'll bypass that one just for our own media safety. However, if you're looking at more of a more generalistic term, Yeah, 100%. I think if you look at 15 years ago, I used to own, I don't know if you guys remember, but I used to own a milkshake shop on Cosham High Street called Shake and Ice. And not a lot of people knew that was me, but that was. And we used to have it was only there for about 6 months. It was a pop-up building we had, and we just used it for 6 months and off we went. And one day we had all of our sweets stolen. And within an hour, we had forensic scientists there, police there, taking fingerprints, swabs for £200 worth of sweets. That's what it was like 10 years ago. Now you have a burglary and no one attends. So is it a failure of the police? I would say absolutely not. Closely recently with the local police force in Portsmouth, especially in the Paulsgrove, Cosham, Drayton, Hilsey and Copner area. I've sat in meetings with the local police recently, and they've been nothing short of fantastic and responsive. However, they can only be responsive and fantastic to their limits of the hours in the day. You know, we always have a limits of the hours in the day, and they always have a limit of resources and a limit of people. And with the massive police cuts and the underfunding of the police service, that's where the system is failing. I mean, the judicial system is also not fantastic because there's not harsher punishments for people that are under the age of 18. And I think there needs to be some reform in that because they can get away with it. So I think it's a two-pronged issue. I think you have a weak judicial system in relation to a punishment for said crime of youths, whilst also having a massive underfunding from the police service in the last decades, which has resulted in them having to prioritise things. And you yourself, guys, now, would you rather police prioritise a mirrors taken off? Which one would you prefer than that? Do you want them to prioritise the attempted murder? So they can only do what they can, resources they have.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a fair point, George. I guess the consideration is whether we have a new breed of kind of shoplifters and whether they've evolved over time where, you know, as you say, I guess it's the brazenness that, you know, that they are known to the police. The police know it's them. They don't particularly make a decent job of hiding their faces on CCTV. You know, and there's an element of with the police, as you say, often, you know, even when you did the legwork for them, you know, that they find an individual, they've got all the evidence, that person ends up, you know, going to court, and you know, it feels that there are, you know, there are a small hardcore of people who will just keep doing this in perpetuity.
Well, absolutely. I think, you know, I mean, it'd be different for me because I'm currently a counsellor, but if I was a normal resident, I mean, because I'm a counsellor, they're plastered me all over the front page of the news, of course. But if I was a normal resident, or say, for example, one of my relatives walked into Co-op tonight, took a packet of sweets off the shelves and walked out with it and got caught, nothing would happen. Nothing would happen. They would get a slap on the wrist or a caution, or nothing would happen. And I think that's the thing from the youths. Not only do they know that nothing will happen, but also the fact that even if they do get caught, there's no real retaliation for that crime. So why not? You know, from their perspective, why not? What they've got to lose? You know, see it in the lights of adults where we learn certain things and understand and become more conscious. But it comes onto the nature versus nurture debate, doesn't it? And if there's no, why wouldn't they?
No, yeah, and I guess that's a whole societal framework question. So I guess the final question is the political one, George, which is that are you going to have to give yourself a stern talking to and threaten to remove the non-existent whip from yourself?
Well, thank God. You know, the answer is no. I mean, we all say things in our group, and sometimes you're going to say the wrong thing, or you're going to say the wrong thing at the wrong time, or so on and so forth. And every now and then the media are going to spin something. They did it to my father a couple of months ago, where they picked up one line from like this whole 3-4 minute thing he had and spun it, you know. And it just happens with the media. I think as long as nobody is actively, I'm not sitting there saying everybody beat up kids. You know, that's what I'm saying. If I was saying that, I should no longer be a counsellor. That's not what the narrative of the story is. I think I'm getting a telling off. My dad certainly called me and said, if I did this, you'll be telling me, give me a right hiding right now, and a few of us counsellors were worried about what the response would be. Within an hour, I could breathe again, and I think you do have to follow the court of public, especially when you're a counsellor, you make opinions relevant, but it's completely relevant in the world of a politician because the public are your boss. So luckily this time I got away with it and it went for me rather than against me. But knowing me, I'll probably say something once again to tell myself off, because if you catch me at 1 a.m. after I've had a busy day, I kind of become a keyboard warrior sometimes.
It would never happen to me, George, but obviously yourself and Simon are a risk, aren't they? So
Indeed. Are you guys looking forward to the elections coming up anyway?
with the hurly-burly of May, yes, definitely, and we obviously we will start within the next probably 5-6 weeks, trying to line up hustings for that sort of mad run all through March and April, and I don't know whether Simon's quite recovered from broadcasting live from the count last year, but I think he could be persuaded to do it again. What do you think, Simon?
Yeah, I'm certainly kind of building myself up to it. But it was certainly worth it. It was certainly a great experience, and I look forward to it again. But who knows? It's all to play for, and there's obviously national stuff that might steal some of the local thunder. But even so, we've got the locals to look forward to at the end of March, as everyone starts being obvious about who their candidates are before the close of nominations, and then it all starts coming to the fore. Yeah, we'll look forward to it, and we'll have our hustings again. So we'll see what happens, and we'll go wherever the political die land.
Well, obviously, as always, you can count me in, so I'll do the hustings, obviously. So I shall be there.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
We look forward to that. It'll be great to have another Paul's Grove hustings. So thanks very much, George.
No worries. Thanks, guys.
We'll let you go and get back to the stoves. So no, thank you for giving up a chunk of your evening, George.
Thank you,
Cheers.
guys. See you later. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye. Okay. So, okay. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Just move quickly on.
No, I think there's I think for me it's that balance, isn't it? And again, I mused on it in terms of, well, your local councillor is there to, potentially. I mean, I know this wasn't in council or anything, but I would suggest from the responses that George got, in terms of representing the views of the quote unquote the people that he represents, then there is that element of I don't think you could I don't think you could say he was out on a limb.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I think rather than it speaking to an advocation for vigilantism, it's speaking to the underlying frustration that lots of residents feel, and the business owners feel, especially small business owners, with everything that they're struggling with at the moment. That they're just not getting the help, and then the odds are completely stacked against them. So you can kind of see that frustration.
Yeah.
You saw that come out when we'd talked previously about the with the deputy police and crime commissioner, and when we spoke about the local event with the police and crime commissioner, the Hampshire police and crime commissioner. Those sorts of things. It's that public frustration of just feeling that the help isn't there when they need it.
And I posted a thread on another political forum about 2-3 months ago where I was reading the evening news, and it was somebody who had been convicted of 13 counts of shoplifting, some of them aggravated where they threatened the staff, all caught on CCTV. And I did this is an old story. This is an old story. I've seen this. This is an old story. And I just Googled the individual's name and shoplifting and found the news article of being convicted for 10 counts in 2022 and 8 counts in 2021 and 20 counts in 2019 and 10 counts in 2018. And I just looked at it and thought, well, this person, for whatever reason, is never going to stop doing this.
No.
And just in a very, and these were the ones where they had been to court and the person had been convicted. And, over a 5-year period, they had been convicted of more than 50 offences. And I think there were fines and there were suspended sentences and there were community service orders. And finally, I think they were sent to prison for 10 weeks, which means they'll be out in 5.
Yeah.
And it would take a smart person. It wouldn't be a smart person who would then bet against them not continuing that behaviour when they come out. And I guess that's where the societal frustration comes through of this person will just continue to walk in with a large duffel bag, start filling it with alcohol, tell the staff to F off or he's going to shank them, and walk out again. And he'll do that repeatedly until he ends up back in court.
Well, I guess there's with the justice system, you've got to kind of balance two things, haven't you? At the end of the day, the best thing forever is for someone not to actually commit any crimes in the first place. But
Yeah.
what you do is to stop them, is to basically make sure that they don't commit any more. So and it's a wider question that we could probably spend an entire evening discussing of what's the best way to do that. And then for the people that just are going through a revolving door of they just can't crack this of kind of breaking this habit of criminal behavior. How do you protect society from them? And what's the most effective way to do that? And I guess that must be, and this was something that the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner spoke of when he was on the show, is that frustration that the police feel of they know who these people are.
Oh yeah. No, it is that element of, it's not a surprise, is it? It's that element
it's
of
that person. Oh, it's them again. So it's Anywho,
well, if we speak then of matters judicial, onto the fun and games this week in Parliament with the Rwanda bill. Now, I know we've covered this in some depth before on other shows. So just a recap for anyone, I guess, who's lived under a stone and doesn't sort of know what the Rwanda bill is, or kind of the whole Rwanda plan more than a bill. So the government has for a number of years now been trying to get an arrangement off the ground where, for some people who are arriving in small boats via people traffickers who land on the shores of the UK, rather than processing their asylum application, the intention is to send them off to Rwanda, where their application will be processed, and even if it's found positive, they are given asylum, but in Rwanda or their choice of other country, but the choice on the table is not the UK. So effectively, if they've come in via a small boat, they are processed, but they can't come back. Now, it's one of these policies which has got a lot of there's been a lot of focus on it, because even the most ambitious numbers that the government have sort of quoted would see the numbers being in hundreds rather than thousands. And just to give an idea of scale, in 2022, there were just over 45,000 people, according to the Home Office, who came in via that route. It was just under 25,000 last year, which obviously, Rishi is waving his little stop the boats flag and is claiming that to be a massive moral victory. So there's only ever going to be it's kind of mooted by its proponents as being a deterrent and if people know they'll end up in Rwanda, they won't come here. They won't risk it. But then, of course, it was ruled as unlawful by the Supreme Court because Rwanda isn't a safe country, according to the Supreme Court. Is that a fair synopsis so far, Simon, or did you want to
Yeah,
add
no,
anything to?
well, that I mean, as an abridged version, yeah. I mean, and then the government plan was to get around that by declaring Rwanda a safe country. Is that right?
Yeah, that is kind of the plan. So and again, I people may not believe that we do research for this show, but I say no. So I read this afternoon elements and extracts from the Rwanda bill, and effectively what the bill that was talked about this week going through Parliament was effectively a legal construct that said no, Rwanda is safe because, and effectively what it looked to do was set aside a number of kind of international treaties and some of the rulings of the European Court for Human Rights, to say, effectively to say, well, even if they say that Rwanda isn't safe, we in the UK believe it's safe, and so under UK law that trumps the any international or outside influence, and so we can crack on sending people to Rwanda. So that was the premise of the bill, but and little Rishi there was very keen to get that pushed through, but unfortunately he was kind of attacked by what looked like it was going to get a bit bumpy for him, with 4 different groups coming sort of looking to organise a rebellion. So there's the first group.
It's just where the group names get steadily more ridiculous as you go further down the list.
Well, he could do. I mean, there is if we start off with a group that call themselves the New Conservatives.
Oh, good grief.
And
okay.
Well, and
yeah.
I guess the New Conservatives could be relabeled as the really rather uneasy Conservatives. And so these are fundamentally the group in 2019 who were elected in the red wall seats. And looking at the opinion polls at the moment, I think it would be fair to say that they don't feel entirely safe, that they're going to get home over the next when the next election comes. So obviously their position is they believe that they were elected fundamentally on Brexit based issues. So there was a fair smattering of them who were who were going to sort of lead this rebellion, and there were a couple of sort of fairly high profile resignations. I'm just trying to remember the chap's name. Lee Anderson was probably the most high profile, deputy leader of the Conservative Party, and another chap, Brendan Clark Smith.
Yeah, didn't they lose 2 deputies because they were going to support the amendments that supposedly were going to make the bill tougher? And the government's position was, we can't make it any tougher because if it does, it will basically, it won't work. The international courts will shoot it down. And then Rwanda, who've also said that we're not going to break international law for you guys. Yeah. So we'll have nowhere to send people, even if they actually finally manage to get a plane to take off.
And that's where it becomes because you've got this new Conservative group who obviously had their piece. You've got the hardline Brexiteers who are still chuntering that things weren't Brexity enough. So Bill Cash himself wrote one of the amendments. Then you've got the people for whom it is alleged that they are preparing their leadership challenge either before or after the next election, and our local, I was going to use the word local heroes, which might raise an eyebrow too, but Fairham's very own Suella Braverman was in that camp. And then the final group, who were basically having a big old snipe at Rishi and his plan, were the Friends of Boris Johnson, which sounds like a lovely woodland group that meet and go on rambles, but they're not that at all. So these sort of 4 came together and made this
the National Trust then.
they're sort of like the National Trust, but perhaps I think it's probably fair to say more on the right of politics than the National Trust. I don't think
Okay.
it would be fair to categorise the National Trust as a political organisation. But yeah, so as you say, they were writing these amendments which were, an awful lot of chest thumping and flag waving and, well, we just disregard everything that the HRC has to go with. And on the Tuesday night, things looked a bit iffy for Rishi because there were 61 MPs who voted for these amendments. Now, naturally, the majority of the party and all of the opposition were never going to support pick a word for such amendments, and it fell with
Wrecking
500 odd
amendments.
to. What did you opt for?
Well, I mean, I don't suppose they actually are, but there's a type of there's a strategy of adding a wrecking amendment that basically seeks to make the bill so unpalatable that it actually won't go through because it just adds something to it. But I guess that's not their motivation, is it? I do find there's a little irony in the fact that there were so many different groups wanting to say we don't know exactly what we want, but we do know what we don't want, and it's this. But they couldn't agree on what they did want, so they all wanted different things, and therefore what they wanted didn't happen.
Yeah.
When's that
Is
really
it? Oh, is
happened
that?
in
Oh,
UK
is
politics?
that an?
I don't think.
Is that an echo? Is that an echo of the past? Are we got ripping the space-time continuum? So yeah, it all looked a bit iffy for Rishi on yeah
Sorry.
on Tuesday night, and then kind of everything went away on Wednesday. So of that original 61, only 11 kind of stood in the position of voting against it. Now, this is where, for those that don't follow, politics too madly, obviously all the opposition parties voted against the amendment, and then all the opposition parties pretty much voted against the bill. So they all rushed over to the no side, and they were joined by 11 Conservatives, and there were some abstentions. I think you noted that former Prime Minister Theresa May sat with her arms folded.
Yes, 17 Conservative MPs abstained, along with 5 members of the DUP, 5 independents, 3 Labour, 1 SNP, the 7 Sinn Féin members, which never take their seats in Parliament anyway, and 1 MP from Abs Alba. Basically, the ones that actually voted, the ones actually kind of voting, well, were not voting either for or against, the ones that basically just sat on their hands. Quite interesting that Theresa May was in that camp, but the ones voting against it, because their amendments didn't get passed, were some of the, I don't know, should we say the heroes of Brexit, or the heroes of the I want this particular flavour of things.
Yeah, and
the names that aren't a surprise, I think, to anybody.
No, and I think some of it is that posturing thing, because obviously, if you look at the polls at the moment, there is an element of, Labour has a significant lead. There is the remnants of UKIP have sort of reformed into Reform UK. I didn't do that deliberately, but it's kind of worked. And it, well, they are, a lot of that sort of hardline Brexiteer on steroid messaging sort of sits with them. So in the end, it was sort of 320 to 276. So it got across the line quite comfortably. But as with all things political, it's not a done deal, as it's off to the Lords. And Rishi was there doing the, making lots of positive noises and encouraging the Lords to do the right thing. And reading round, there is a fairly, most political commentators are suggesting that the Lords won't kill it, but there is a fair school of thought that says they're liable to propose amendments, which means that it will go back to the Commons. And most think that the amendments will probably look to, if I use the phrase watered down, Simon, I'm trying to sort of view this from a perspective of the hardliners within the Conservative Party. So there's an element of, for 11 and some abstainers, it wasn't hardline enough. For 61, they were happy to make a noise about it not being hardline enough. The question, I guess, is if a watered down version comes back, A, will those hardliners then vote against it? Will they cross the divide? Or B, will it just take too much time that it doesn't get on the statute books before October the 26th or whatever date it was that I've decided the general election's happening?
It's entirely possible, yes, that the Lords, as you say, water it down to the point that the problem is that you've got and give up on the kind of the left or the right kind of definition. For some, it's Sunak's trying to find the Goldilocks Rwanda bill, isn't he? Because
he certainly is.
Too cold for some and too hot for others, and he's trying to find the Rwanda bill that's just right, that everyone can agree on, and quote unquote, to take my analogy to the most distasteful level, that it's yummy and can be consumed. So that's the problem that he's got, and that problem isn't going to get any easier. I think the PM's making and the government are making lots of noise about it's the Labour Party's fault for basically not supporting it, but it's really because the government can't actually get their own party to agree on what it should be. But they still got a substantial number of majority, haven't they? So I guess there's a majority of 44, so they've got some numbers to play with, and it's still to get through. It's just the $64 million question is just how much watering down, to use your metaphor, does the Lords engage in, and where does the government go from there?
Yeah, and I think there is a piece where, and it's a very contentious bill, and I think the whole, I've never been the greatest fan of it. I'm sort of okay with the idea of a deterrent, but when the total cost of it is looking that it's going to run to £400 million, and for every asylum seeker that ends up in Rwanda, it'll cost £63,000 more than processing them in the UK. That doesn't look like great value to me. But again, having done my research today, the fact that the whole asylum system currently costs £4 billion a year, including £8 million a day on hotels, it's an element of, if 400 million over 5 years works, then I guess that's a bit of a bargain. If it brings down the 20 billion cost over 5 years, but it's an element of, I guess, where I've always thought, even if I try and look at this in a very cold, hard way, somebody who is prepared to pay a person smuggler to get them across the channel in a small boat, knowing that at that point their asylum application, be it valid or not, does not have 100% chance of being approved, they're gambling, aren't they? And so there's an element of, if there's 25,000 coming across and only, let's pick a number, 500 are going to end up in Rwanda, then if you look at all the risks and all the all the
those odds don't, and that's even deterrent, didn't it?
Those odds aren't working for me. If I've made, if I have come, if I have trekked all across Europe from Syria, and I've done the whole people smuggling thing, going, oh well, your chances are there's now a 2% chance that you might end up in Rwanda. Well, I'll roll the dice, I think.
And that's the thing for me, is that it's Rwanda can't both be a deterrent and a safe place to send people. And it's all well and good using phrases like illegal migration, but if you don't have legal migration, then you are actually just. I mean, it's how did that work out for prohibition in the States? You just basically give that trade to other people, and as you say, the chances of someone actually being caught and therefore and then them even being sent to Rwanda are so low that it doesn't work as it doesn't work as a deterrent. So both on a logistical sense, on a practical sense, and a financial sense, and a humanity sense, I think it's a bonkers idea. But it seems to be we're going to do this thing because it's a 3-word slogan that we kind of really like. And all of this shouting and hammering of tables in Westminster, as you say, may just come to naught because it just won't happen before the next general election.
Yeah, and I think there is an element of, it's a complex process, isn't it? And I think the difficulty, and again, the difficulty the Conservatives have at the moment is that, as you say, Rishi's trying to take this kind of mediating line, but at the same time, he's got Reform UK on the extreme edge, banging the table and appealing to a section of the electorate that you know effectively think we should build a wall. Do you know what I mean? It's that element
Yeah.
of, from a political perspective, that those are not voters that are gonna look to Sir Keir Starmer or even your beloved Liberal Democrats in the next election. So they're either voting Conservative or they're voting Reform, and
Yeah.
Rishi needs every vote he can get at the moment. So yeah,
Well, even within his own party. But let's move.
well, exactly that. Which brings us on to our final topic. What have you got for us, Simon?
So, talking of gaining votes, so up until the 16th of January, it was the case that if you left the UK, if you migrated, so if you emigrated from the UK, that you lost your right to vote in UK general elections and referendums. God, I hope we don't have any more. For after 15 years of leaving the country, and there's been
Seems very fair.
well, yeah. There's some argument points around that. So basically, there's been a campaign going on for decades with some really key principal figures like World War II veteran Harry Schindler, who'd moved to Italy some 40 years ago and sadly passed away in 2023 before this policy change came into effect. But essentially now what is the case is that if you leave the UK, you basically retain your right to vote in UK general election and referenda for life. And instead of previously you needed to register to vote every year, now you only need to register to vote every 3 years, and you register at whichever local authority that you resided under when you were in the UK. And the council will also give you a reminder in the last 4 months of your 3-year period to tell you that your right to vote is just about to expire. And this even applies to people that when they left the UK they weren't old enough to vote. Yes. So if you leave when your family emigrates to for example Australia, if you're 12 when you become legally old enough to vote in the UK, you're able to register to vote in UK general elections and referenda. So this applies to people whether they are people that are just happen to be working for long periods of time abroad and they intend to return to the UK, but also to people that are not intending to return to the UK except for visitation of family, etc., possibly. So and also by now being on the electoral roll, this means that people that currently aren't allowed to personally donate to political parties in the UK, that don't pay any tax in the UK, don't reside in the UK, will now be able to make donations to political parties. That couldn't possibly be anything to do with it rather than the votes. I'm not sure.
Well, it all seems a bit peculiar to me, Simon. I find this all rather bizarre because, well, I find many things with the sort of whole expat community quite bizarre. There is a political forum we're both aware of where I learned only recently that one of the most ardent Brexiteers on there, who is very vocal about the dreadfulness of the EU and how they've been campaigning since the early 70s. And no, Paddy, it's not you. I know that you they live in Spain.
Well,
And I'm like,
and
hey,
they make their choices. Obviously, that means that since leaving the EU, they'd have had to apply for residency to remain in Spain. Oh, sorry, the irony of remain in Spain.
yeah,
Yep. Because otherwise they're only able to live there for 90 days at a time, if memory serves.
something like that.
So I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of like a side. But for me, I get there's the danger of a disenfranchisement of people that are living outside the UK, but possibly at some are inevitably likely to return to the UK at some point for work reasons. They might be living abroad, and are likely to return. But someone that has decided to spend the rest of their life has left the UK.
Yeah.
I don't get what they're not paying taxes here. They're not affected
Nope.
by political decisions that are made here. Or in your example, they were part of the political. Sorry, they were part of the political decision that has affected them, but they made that choice. They obviously knew what they were voting for. So to me, I actually think that this is not the right policy. Interestingly, the Labour Party were not in favour of this and wanted to retain basically the 15-year mark. So yeah, I mean, other countries seem to have things about people that are working abroad from their country still have the ability to vote, but I don't know how long that goes on. And from a practicality point of view, because we don't have digital voting, anybody that is abroad can either vote by post, and the dangers will be that by the time the postal ballot gets to them and they fill it in and return it, it's going to miss the voting window. Or they have a proxy vote. And here's the thing, on the government website, it says the 3 ways to make sure that you can vote in the election if you're no longer a UK resident but entitled to vote. You can either have a postal vote or have a proxy vote, so get someone else that still lives here to vote on your behalf, or get this, come back to the UK and vote and go home again.
Well, it's
I mean, okay, it's a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a day out, isn't it? I mean, it's I do it because I have to, but I'm slightly peeved at having to walk down to the local church hall to place my X. I'm not sure if I had to fly halfway across the world. I'm again, I'm all for the democratic process, but I'm not sure I'd bother.
One of these media moguls with their private jets suddenly swooning in.
Well, yeah, I think. And this is one of those ones, Simon, where you kind of look for what's behind the story, don't you? Because, again, I look at it and it's like, oh, your local council now has to set up a database and keep the database up to date, and they have to send you the reminder, and
then you in Australia or Spain or wherever you might.
and even if it's if it's an automated email, it's just somebody's got to do something with it, and it's that element to enable somebody who has decided to naff off and live elsewhere. This is one where I am, and I got your little cynical eyebrow raised there in terms of, is this about? But I guess there's an element of, usually the people that have got that much money are smart enough to find ways to move their money into the country, and
I mean, there'll be, I'm sure there'll be banks, not Aaron, banks,
no,
that understand the mechanisms for that. I did a rough poll on Portsmouth Politics Facebook group, and by and large, the result was so far has been basically not in favour of the policy. So basically, that it should have stayed as it was.
Yeah.
So there was an interesting little conversation, and just say that the government's own figures say that means that the eligible voters so non-UK resident eligible voters will go from somewhere around 1 million to somewhere around 3.5 million.
Yeah, but it's one of those things which is and again, I'll have to ask him. My brother emigrated to the US 20 odd years ago, so he can probably he can now cast his vote back in our hometown of Gosport. Although I wonder whether that still applies because he no longer has dual citizenship and is an American citizen.
He will,
So
if he was eligible to vote in the UK,
he was.
was
He was.
born in the UK. So whether he's born in Great Britain or Northern Ireland, will be entitled to register to vote now, and to be able to vote in UK general elections from the constituency of Gosport, or what is it, Gosport and Fareham now under the boundary review, I think. I'm not sure.
Right.
Well, no, it's Fareham and Waterloo. No, I think it's just Gosport, isn't it?
It is
Who
just
knows?
Gosport, I think
How much
so. Yeah. Well, I'll have to I will have to get in contact with him and see whether he wishes to exercise his democratic right. I'm sure he's going to tell me to get stuffed, but still, what a very strange policy. So, right, three a smorgasbord of topics adequately covered, and so you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sansbury. Our guest, of course, was Councillor George Madrick. Please do join us next time, 6:27, for our next show. Please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, send cookies, tea, whatever you like. That will be greatly appreciated. But see you next week at 6:27 in the usual place.